Hello, hello. So allow me to tell you a story. It's a fictional story, but it might as well be our story. It applies to all of us. Let's say that a person is in high school, let's say, or middle school, and they meet a boy, they meet a girl, and they had never quite felt that feeling before. They begin to feel different inside. I mean, maybe they're 13, 14 years of age, and they eventually, let's say it's a boy, because so they eventually ask this girl to go have ice cream with him or something like that. And he really likes her. He doesn't really know what it is. She's a girl, she's pretty, and there's just something about her. And one day he kind of walks her home. They live close to the school. And as he's saying goodnight to her before she goes into the house, he kind of embraces her a little bit, and something really weird begins to happen. And he gives her a little kiss, and she kind of responds to the kiss. And next thing you know, they're going out, and they kind of became a couple. So now they are coupled, right? So they're going out and they talk on the phone, and she considers him to be her boyfriend, and he considers her to be his girlfriend. Now we have a couple that has formed, and life continues. He's in the football team, she's a cheerleader, and something happens, and she thinks that he's talking to another girl or whatever happens, and they have a fight. Now this woman, this girl that he really, really liked, somehow, he can't stand the fact that she's nagging so much. And I'm making all of this up, but follow along. There's a point to this. I assure you there's a point. Stay with it. And so she becomes, she's hurt. So she nags, or she raises her voice, and he doesn't like that. So they have a fight, and they don't talk for a week, which feels like an eternity. They're not talking. Now they are in the conflict stage. You see, they're not talking. They're in conflict. We call this the passive phase of the conflict. They're not talking. So then one day he calls her up and says, look, we got to talk this out. I really don't like what you're doing. And she says, I don't like what you did. And they scream at each other for a while. They're still in conflict, but now they're in the active phase of the conflict. They're bickering, they're screaming, they're arguing with one another. They're raising their voices. They're not communicating actually, but they're unloading some discomfort that they each have inside the active phase of the conflict. And eventually they make up. They make up, they reconnect, they kiss again, they go have the ice cream again. Now the couple is in joy and flow again. They're in love again. It's working. I love you. I'm going to be with you forever. They're only 14, but they're already planning when they're going to retire and so forth. And everything is perfect because they are in love. We call this joy. Eventually, she meets somebody else, and she goes have ice cream with another guy, or he does. It doesn't matter. The point is that they have this massive separation, and the other party, the one who didn't go have the ice cream, is heartbroken. They're in pain. See, they're in a lot of pain now because I can't believe he did this. I can't believe she did that. So what I've illustrated here are 4 connection states. This is different from the marital status. These are connection status, right? So you go from wanting to meet somebody, we call this open or ready, to the idea of joy and flow. In other words, when we're in love. Then you go to this idea of conflict or rift, which can be active or passive. And we go through this idea of pain, which is various degrees of heartbreak, right? But then the girl who's 14, the guy who's 14 in middle school, they meet somebody else in high school, and the same thing happens. This time they don't have the ice cream. This time they go have the hot dog or the hamburger, and the whole process begins again. They went from heartbreak to getting themselves ready again. They met somebody else. They're in love again. They communicate. They feel elated. They feel enjoy. Eventually, there's some type of conflict, and they might have a separation that is traumatic to them, and they're in heartbreak again. The first time it happened in middle school, now it happened in high school. And when we talk to that particular person, they're going, and I ask them, was it the same? They're going to tell you, well, not quite the same. The first time I was in middle school, I was young, I was a kid, I didn't know what I was doing. Now I'm much more experienced. I'm in high school already. I know about girls, I know about boys. You see, so it's the same cycle that we go through: ready, open, connected, joy, flow, conflict, active or passive, and then heartbreak or pain, right? We go through the same cycle, but at a higher level. So every time you have the same cycle, but at a higher level, now this guy goes to college and the same thing happens again. He meets another fellow student in college and the whole thing repeats. But now they're college student, much more sophisticated. There's a whole different level of communication, maybe their sexuality. Point being that we go through the same 4 connection states, but at a much higher level. This will continue throughout your life. And then people tell me, well, what if right out of high school I marry my sweetheart and I remain with that person for the next 50 years? And we go through the same 4 connection status. If, in other words, the connection states, we go through the same 4 connection states, even if you remain with the same partner. What I want to illustrate here is that your marital status is not the same thing as your connection status. So suppose the person did marry right out of high school, they have the same husband, the same wife for 50 years. Throughout those 50 years, they will go through a state of ready. I want more. I love my husband. I love my wife. But he's in the military. He's in the Philippines. I don't see him very often. But I'm ready for more. As an example, right? Husband comes home and now they're in love. They're in joy again. Everything flows perfectly. Everything is perfect. They're in love all over again. Then he's been home now for 3 or 4 weeks and all he does is watch TV. Of course, the guy was gone for 6 months. I'm making all of this up, but you get the point. The cycle repeats. Now they have some bickering and now they are in conflict. And eventually something happened. He has to leave again. So she's in heartbreak. She's in pain. So they're still married. You see, the marital status has not changed. They're still married, same partner, but they just went through the same 4 connection states all over again. Now, I want to say this. The cycle is the same. We're going to go through ready, joy, conflict or rift, and pain or heartbreak. We're going to go through those 4 stations many times in our lives, and not just in reference to a romantic partner. We go through the same states in connection with children, with our parents, even with our jobs, our health. We're not always very happy with our bodies. It does weird things to us, and on and on and on. The same 4 connection states, right? So when we go through the same 4 states over and over, but each time if I were to ask you, you would say, yeah, I've been through this before, but it's not quite the same. I know it's not quite the same because you're not quite the same. So that suggests not a circle, but a spiral, because we go through the same positions around the circle, but every time at a higher level. So that suggests the idea of a spiral. This is where we came up with the idea of the spiral of love. It is the idea that we repeat those same 4 stations over and over, but at a higher level, regardless of whether or not you have one partner or multiple partners. And as I said, it also applies to the relationship with the body, relationship with children, relationship with money, with finances, with your vocation. The same thing happens there. We go through the same 4 connection states over and over, but at a higher level, a higher degree of understanding. So my job is to help people move into joy. They are going to be in one of 3 states when they come to see me. Either they are in a state of they're ready, they're open, they want to connect at a higher level. Now that person who is in that love state or the connection state, they could be single or married. I gave you the example of the married person whose husband's in the military and they're ready, they're open, they're not in pain, they're not in conflict, but they're not in joy either. They are ready, they want it, but they don't have it, and they're married. Or this person could be completely single and they're looking for a partner, they're looking for a husband, they're looking for a wife. So once again, marital status is different from connection status. And the same thing happens in the other states. So person could be married, let's say, but they're not in joy. They're not in flow. They're in conflict. The person could be single and be in conflict. They hate everybody around them. They hate themselves. They're in conflict. They're fighting with themselves. So connection, status, marital status, two different things, and they intermingle. Our love journey, or the love spiral, is this journey that we're going to go throughout our lives, throughout those 4 stations, but ever at a higher level. So whether you are maritally, single or married or dating somebody, pay attention to what connection state you're in. And our job is to always be pushing toward the idea of joy. It's important that we do that because that's how we keep on climbing this spiral of love. We keep on climbing. Now, it becomes a problem when we get stuck in any one of those positions. Unfortunately, none of us gets stuck in the joy state. You never heard of this. Oh, I'm so bored. I have been in such joy for 50 years. You don't hear this. But we sometimes do get stuck in this position of pain, conflict, waiting for something to happen, but it never happens, right? We get stuck in other positions. Our job is to unstuck ourselves so that we can move into the next status or the next state, and we can spend as much time of our lives as possible in a state of joy and flow, all right? So let's continue this conversation because it's just getting started.